Hello, my name is Yura and welcome to another Baldur's Gate 3 build video. In today's video I'd like to show you my Giggling Death build, which will be a relatively fun build that's only really viable and doable only in Act 3, so it's not really something you would potentially want to do as your entire playthrough. It's just something I thought of that would be interesting to try out and see how it works, and it works relatively well, especially because we'll be guaranteeing to get our critical hits with our Clan Hammer with our Assassin subclass. But anyway, more into that later when we get to the rest of those, so let's get into the character creation. So for our race, I think for this type of character, which would focus around dealing critical hit damage, especially on our first turn, would be a half-orc. Reason being, half-orcs get the Savage Attacks feature, which what happens is whenever you land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, you deal an extra die of weapon damage. So this will increase our damage by 1 extra die of our weapon damage when we crit. So instead of, let's say, dealing 2d10 on a crit, we deal 3d10. As a half-orc, we also get a relentless endurance, so when our hit points drop to zero, we gain 1 hit point back instead. So similar to how the zombies work, we work with this as well, although this is only once per long rest if I'm not mistaken. We also get dark vision up to 40 feet, which is pretty useful. And we have the standard racial movement of 30 feet per turn. For our class, we're going as a fighter. Now, you could do this as a barbarian as well, where you can get the savage attacks, which basically do the same thing as, brutal. It's called the brutal critical, which does the same thing as savage attacks do. You could go that way. But personally, I went as a fighter. Reason being is this will allow us to attack 4 times per turn, because we will have, 3 times if we go 11 levels, but unfortunately we'll be not going that way. Instead, 4 times per turn, because we have, of course, the action surge at level 2. So we're gonna go as a fighter. On top of that, we'll also get the great weapon fighting style, since we will have it here. What this allows us to do is when we roll a 1 or a 2 or a damage die for a weapon that we use with 2 hands, we reroll that die once, so on average it should increase our damage, at least it shouldn't reduce the damage, right? So pretty good for 200 weapons. For our background, I went the Guild Artisan. This gives us skills in Insight and Persuasion. Pretty useful all around. The Insight and Persuasion are very useful throughout the entire game. Probably the best. Well, this is my favorite background. You can go with any background you may prefer. It's not too serious. Again, this is just a little fun Act 3 build that you can do with a hireling, or with, if you have a character that is a half-orc already, or really with anyone. Anyone should work just fine. For ability scores, we'll go with the standard sort of fighter ability scores. So 17 strength, 14 dexterity, 16 constitution, and 10 wisdom. 17 strength, of course, our main combat skill. So we want this to be as high as possible so that we have accuracy and so on. Dexterity is just here for a little bit of extra initiative. We will be wielding heavy armor. Although, honestly, with this character, you can get any armor, medium or heavy. It doesn't really matter. If you're going with medium armor, you can need dexterity. You would need it regardless, because you want to be first in initiative, especially when you ambush somebody, because we'll be also getting alert feet, for example, so this will be quite necessary to have. Then we have Constitution 16. This will help us with our HP. We won't be really concentrating on spells. And then Wisdom 10, just to help us a little bit save against the Wisdom saving throws that our opponents might chuck against us. Now, for our skills, you could take Perception. Perception is probably the best one out of all of these, because it is so useful on everyone for perceiving the invisible buttons, levers, and so on, and traps, for example. Survival, we don't really need it, especially if you're using this character on Act 3. Animal handling and history as well, and then acrobatics and athletics, these are both actually useful, so you go either one of those. As I'm gonna go for will be perception and athletics. Alright, so at level 2 we get an action surge, and we can move on to level 3. Level 3 we unlock our subclass, and here we're gonna go with fighter champion. So this is basically kind of the vanilla, but we want to reduce our critical roll requirement for a critical hit. Reason being, of course, after we are done with our ambush feat, we want to then potentially strike extra critical hits during the combat, so that we can debuff or crowd control our enemies with, of course, the clown hammer. So champion will be quite useful here. We'll also be getting a few other items that will be reducing our critical roll required, which is pretty good. At level 4, we unlock our first feat, and at this point I was just going for ability improvement +2 into strength. Now, considering this, I'm making as a Act 3 character, you don't necessarily need Untitled Hair. We will be getting Heavy Armor Master to get to 20 strength, and then you can get 22 strength if you do the Mirror of Loss with this character, so you can get up to 22. Or if for whatever reason you have saved up one anti-atal's hair of strength, you can give it to this character, and then you don't need heavy armor master. And also potentially if you saved the potion of everlasting vigor, then you could go up to 24, but I don't really see it necessary for this character to save any of those things, because again, this is more of a fun little joke character, not really something serious. So we'll be getting up to 22 strength with heavy armor master and the mirror of loss. At level 5 we get our extra attack, and we can move on to level 6. At level 6, now here you could take Great Weapon Master immediately, or it doesn't really matter. You could go. We could just go in order, since we are considering this to be at level 12 when you would want to build this character. So we're just gonna take alert right now. This is gonna help us where we want to be first, so that we can attack surprised enemies. Basically, that whenever we ambush somebody, we make them surprised, and then we make sure that they stay surprised if we're first, so we get those guaranteed critical hits. At level 7, we get the remarkable athlete proficiency and athlete jump. This increases our jump distance by 10, which is pretty useful, since of course gets us greater mobility. And then this one adds our half our proficiency bonus to any strength, dexterity, and constitution saving throw, or check that we're not proficient in. If it was a saving throw, it would be a lot better, but it's only a check, so that's still fine. It's better than nothing. At level 8, we're gonna pick up Great Weapon Master. Great Weapon Master, what it does is gives us a flat 10 bonus damage at a cost of 5 accuracy. Now, of course, that will be relatively negated by our ability to get advantage and guaranteed critical hits against ambushed or surprised enemies. So we'll be able to use this rather effectively against them. We'll also be using, for example, the Oil of Accuracy to also help us negate it. Also, when we run a critical hit, or if we kill a target with a melee weapon attack, we gain an additional bonus action weapon attack, which we can use to gain a third weapon action outside of our normal 2 extra attack ones. At level 9, we will start our multi-class here, and we're going to go into a rogue. Now, the reason we're going for rogue, we want to get the subclass of the assassin, which will grant us the abilities that we want. Now, here with the skills, we gain a few choices. Now, for the proficiency, honestly, you might as well just go perception, so like banking on that, and then investigation, or just take acrobatics as sleight of hand and stealth. You wouldn't want this as your character unless you really need a sort of emergency sleight of hand character. Otherwise, I don't really see the need for it. At level 10, we gain our cunning action, hide, dash, and disengage, which are pretty useful. At level 11, we get our rogue subclass, and here we're going to go with assassin. Now, reason for assassin we want is we get the assassin initiative. You're deadliest against unprepared enemies. In combat, you have advantage on attack rolls against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. This is why it's rather important for us to be relatively first. Then we also get the assassinate ambush. Any successful attack roll against a surprise creature is a critical hit. And then assassin's alacrity, quick and agile cat, in you immediately restore your action and bonus action on start of combat. Now, we won't have as much initiative as somebody who, for example, has a lot of dexterity, so we'll be a little bit lacking on that part. But a lot of the enemies that do have high initiative anyway, they usually have alert, or they have a high initiative because they're bosses, so ambushing them doesn't always work. There are a few that it can work, so I would suggest you experiment with that, because for example, I believe you can potentially try to ambush Auntie Ethel, or it's kind of difficult because she is invisible, but it is, I believe, possible. But for example, somebody like Gortash, it's not really possible. He has alert feat as well. So, but yeah, every other combat engagement, for example, if you fight the 3 Baal characters in the cistern, where there's that big pipe, you can ambush them, for example, and there's a lot of choice opportunities for you to use this throughout Act 3, so I think it's still a little useful to have as an assassin, a little fun build, right? But anyway, moving to our last level, we get our 4th and last feat, and here, if you for whatever reason saved Untitled Sarah's strength +1, then you could go just take Savage Attacker, which is gonna whenever you use a melee weapon attack, you roll your damage by twice, you use the highest result. But otherwise, I would just go with Heavy Armor Master. This gives us +1 to our strength, and when wearing heavy armor, we reduce all incoming damage by 3 unless it is magical. So a pretty useful feat to have right there. Alright, so that is it for the levels. I want to see you in the equipment section. Alright, so here we are in the equipment section. So let's start with one of our elite powers. Here we have fly ability. So the reason we want this, of course, is this will allow us actually a lot greater mobility than if we jump or move normally. Because if we take a look, we're in turn-based mode right now. If we try to move, we can move about 45 feet worth of movement, right? Before our entire movement bar dissipates. And if we try to fly around, to that roughly that same spot, we use up around half of our movement bar. So we can move much further when we are flying, and this doesn't cost us our action or bonus action. So this is why I was just taking this, as you'll see in the combat showcase, why it's kind of important. Then for the rest of our equipment, we have the Saravok's Horn Helmet. Reason we want this mainly is so it reduces our roll required for a critical hit, so by 1, so now we crit on an 18 with this helmet on. It does give us extra 10 feet of dark vision, so we can see a little bit further in the dark. Nothing too fancy, it's okay, it's nothing to, of course, to write home about. Then it also gives us the Dauntless effect, so we can't be frightened or we cannot be afflicted with other emotion-altering conditions. Now, why is this important? Well, if you for whatever reason run out of the face painting kit, which gives you the clown face paint, which of course makes you immune to hideous laughter, the helmet does the same thing on top of other things. So you can wear it, or you can also not necessarily, you don't need to wear it, of course. It's up to you. But I was just, of course, I'm talking about the face paint, right? You can wear it or you don't need to, but of course, for aesthetic purposes, you would probably want to wear it. For our cloak, we are going with the glow protection. Excuse me. Now, this character doesn't really need any cloaks. You can go pretty much with any cloak you may want to go with, or just no cloaks. It's completely up to you. It doesn't really make or break the build. Same thing for our armor. Only thing I was just is if you pick up the heavy armor master, that you go with heavy armor so that you gain the benefits of reducing incoming slashing, bludgeoning, piercing damage by 3 unless it is magical. So for this, I just took the rippling force mail. This gives you conduit per turn. And that's about it, nothing too fancy. So again, any heavy armor you may want to put on this card, you can. And also you can relatively make this armor colorful, so that's why I chose it. Now for the gloves, I think these are important, which are the Traitor Flesh gloves. So what it happens is, whenever you crit, you deal additional 1d6 force damage from these gloves. Now, what this doesn't tell you is when you actually crit, this should be a 2d6 instead. And on top of that, it applies other effects, such as, for example, the vicious shortbow effect, which whenever you land a critical hit with a weapon or unarmed attack, you deal additional 7 damage. So you deal additional 7 damage in your bludgeoning and also force damage. So this is why these gloves are so great on high crit chance or assassin type characters. For boots, same thing, pretty much any boots will work. I took the Silver Sea shoes, although they're kind of redundant because increasing jumping distance by 5 feet doesn't really matter since we have the ability to fly, right? So any boots you may want, you can take instead. They will work just fine. Then for our amulet, I went with the Surgeon Subjugation amulet. Now this one is rather important because once per long rest, when we score a critical hit on a humanoid, we can paralyze them for 2 turns. This is actually quite powerful because, of course, that guarantees 2 turns of essentially getting 100% critical hits against those targets, which is very powerful. For the rings, we have the Grudge's Ring. This is just so we have extra speed, so we have extra movement. We can fly a bit further or just run a bit further. You could replace it for example, the Acoustic Band, which gives you 2 extra acid damage. Now, this damage, I believe it cannot crit because it's a flat 2, so it shouldn't be able to crit, although if it can crit, that's even better, right? Then the second one we have is the Shadow Cloaked Ring. So the wearer's weapon and armor attacks deal additional 1d4 damage against lightly or heavily obscured creatures. This is a very important one because this damage should be able to crit, so we can deal extra 2d4 damage. And getting enemies that are slightly or heavily obscured is quite easy because if anybody is, for example, standing in a shadow of a building, they should be considered lightly obscured, so this should work just fine against those. So that is it for basically not a whole lot of alternatives because, again, this is basically a fun little Act 3 build that you can get, and there isn't too much equipment that you can roll around with it. Now for the weapon, we have the Clown Hammer. Whenever this weapon lands a critical hit, both target and the attacker must succeed a Wisdom saving throw or become afflicted with fits of laughter. Now, since we are wearing the Clown face paint or the Saravok's Horn Helmet, this basically doesn't affect us. We're immune to it, right? So only our enemies will be having to force to roll that roll. Now, the way to increase the chance of this succeeding is if you run around with the Resonance Stone. Now, Resonance Stone, what it does is the affected entities have advantage on physical checks, but have disadvantage on mental saving throws. So, Wisdom, Intelligence, and Charisma, if I'm not wrong. Now, do also be careful if you use this around Mind Flayers. They will deal double damage to you with psychic damage because you become vulnerable. So if you know you're fighting Mind Flayers or you're just fighting them, you can just send this to camp so that they don't absolutely obliterate your party, right? Because they will also, you can potentially get stuck in a loop where they just permanently stun you with the Mind Blast ability that they have. And then finally, for our ranged weapon, we're going with the Vicious Shortbow. As mentioned earlier, basically when you run a critical hit, it deals additional 7 damage. So our weapon and in our case, our gloves as well. And finally, for some of the elixirs and potions, so I was just going for the elixir of viciousness or elixir of giant, because it increases your damage die if you go for the giant elixir. You deal additional 1d4 damage, although elixir of viciousness causes you to crit now on a 17 instead of 18 with all of our equipment. Then we have the potion of invisibility. This is very important. This is how we're going to be ambushing enemies, because we have terrible stealth, and we have a really bad chances of actually succeeding in stealth. This is going to help us circumvent that, and we can basically ambush enemies on demand, since of course, unless somehow they have seen invisibility. And then finally, order of accuracy. You want this against high armor class enemies so that you can hit them before you ambush them, or when you try to ambush them, since we don't have through our equipment a lot of items that actually boost our accuracy, and it does help that the hammer is a +2, but yeah. Alright, so that is it for the equipment. I will see you in the combat showcase. Alright, so here we are at Flaming Fists Barracks for yet another battle showcase. Now, before combat starts, I did drink a potion of visibility and elixir of viciousness, and I applied a roll of accuracy to my weapon just so that we can get into position for ambushing our enemies. Now, I think the most consistent way I've found to actually surprise enemies is if you attack them from outside of their line of sight, and preferably with a ranged weapon. With a melee weapon it can work, but you have to make sure you're not touching their line of sight. Sometimes if you're too close, they will just see you and they won't be surprised. But if you do it with a ranged attack, it should work. Also, I like to make sure that I'm crouching even though I'm invisible, and also in turn-based. So let's take a look and see if we actually manage to ambush this fist. Now, of course, we're not using the clown hammer, but that's fine. We'll not react here with the thing, and we managed to surprise all of them. And thankfully we're first. We actually rolled higher initiative than this fist. Usually she's first because she has quite a lot of dexterity, but regardless. Now, we're assassins, so our action got reset. So let's take a look here. If we smack her, she'll probably die when we crit her, right? Yeah, which is quite unfortunate. But anyway, we can still take a look at the damage and the saving throw. So our damage here is a 2d10 from the hammer itself, then +2 and +5 from our enchantment and the proficiency modifier. Then 7 we got from a 2d4 bludgeoning from the ring, +10 and +7 from the Great Weapon Master and Dollar Amarus, and then a 1d10 extra from the Savage Attacks, which is pretty good, so really high damage. On top of that, our gloves did actually end up being a 2d6 instead of 1d6, so that 1d6 actually gets crit itself. It just doesn't apply 1d6 when you crit, for whatever reason. Then Dollar Amarus got applied onto the gloves as well, and our Savage Attacks also got applied onto the gloves, because we are dealing 1d6 extra damage there as well. So pretty high damage. Now, the reason we wanted to get that flying ability is we're going to fly over to these fists here, and we're going to try to bonk them, see if they fail the saving throw. Now, these two will probably fail it because they have relatively low wisdom and they don't have proficiency in it. Now, of course, we have Great Weapon Master, so we can use our extra bonus action to bonk them as with that as well. So he failed it. Now we do roll 2 extra saving throws. Now the first one is our saving throw, and the second one is the enemy saving throw. So the first one is here. We rolled a 1 with disadvantage. Now, of course, because we have the helmet or the face paint, this of course doesn't really bother us, but they failed as well because disadvantage because of the resonance stone. Now let's see if we can bonk this guy and make him laugh as well, and we do. Then we can use our action surge, so we get 2 extra attack. We'll fly over to this flaming fist here. Now, I'm wondering if she'll fail it as well, because she has quite a lot of wisdom and she has proficiency in saving throws as well. So let's take a look. She did manage to save, but because, well, she did save. If you take a look here, yeah, she saved it. So we'll just paralyze her. Might as well do it. We have the ring. And now we would want to fly over to this guy, but we can't because we did run out of movement, although we did get a bunch of enemies disabled. Now, we could also just shoot this guy with a bow to get that crit damage, and of course the hammer won't work because we actually have to use the hammer to hit them, but we can still take that extra damage. And then now when we got our enemies surprised and on the ground and whatever, you wouldn't want to end your turn here. You would then get your party sneak in, try to get as close as possible, or then attack them one by one, or just reveal yourself and start combat like that. It's up to you. But anyway, that is it for the build. I hope you enjoyed. I would appreciate it if you leave a like, comment, subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and I'll see you in the next one.